The noonday sun baked Dry Creek's main street until the dust shimmered like water, yet every eye still turned toward the lone rider approaching from the sagebrush flats. He sat a slab-white stallion, his own skin paler than bleached bone, white hair tucked beneath a battered Stetson. Folks whispered that Elias Whitaker, the albino gun for hire, was more legend than flesh, a man who never missed and never stayed. When he dismounted outside Miller's saloon, he moved with the calm of someone who'd already weighed every danger and accepted it. Elias hadn't tasted a decent night's sleep in weeks, but he hadn't come for whiskey or cards. Inside, a desperate grandfather was ready to sell something no Christian soul should ever price: a 15-year-old girl. Elias pushed through the batwing doors, spurs clicking soft as a rattler's warning. Whatever conscience he had left rode beside him like a ghost hand before sunset. That ghost would demand payment no stack of dollar bills could cover. The air inside Miller's saloon felt like soup thick with pipe smoke, spilled rye, and the weary sighs of men who'd traded too many dreams for too little luck. Elias paused just inside the batwing doors, letting his eyes adjust to the dim. Even in the half-light, his albinism made him stand out, skin almost luminous, lashes so pale they seemed frosted. A hush traveled the room the way prairie fire crawls through dry grass, yet Elias scarcely noticed. His attention drilled straight to the far corner where an older man hunched over a whiskey glass, knuckles white around a crumpled sheet of paper. Silas Granger looked nothing like the steady shopkeeper Elias remembered from 15 years ago. His once trim beard was now an unkempt gray thicket, and his eyesonce, clear as mountain water, had the wet red glaze of a lamp that's burned too long. The paper in his fist trembled with each ragged breath. Elias crossed the floor, spurs ticking like a pocket watch counting down to judgment. "You the one doing business?" he asked, voice calm but cold. Silas jerked his head up. For an instant, confusion flickered there, followed by calculation. "Depends who's asking." The words slurred, yet the greed behind them rang clear. Elias drew a small roll of bills from his duster, exactly $500, the sum he'd been told to bring. He laid it on the sticky table between them. "I pay, you deliver, no tricks." His pale eyes held Silas steady as a snake pinned with a forked stick. Silas swallowed, Adam's apple bobbing like a cork in choppy water. "Girl's 15. Healthy. Been kept clean. You won't find better this side of Santa Fe." He tried to smile, but the whiskey robbed the gesture of warmth, leaving only hunger. "Name's not important. What matters is, she'll do as she's told." Some fragments of memorisomers spent mending fence with Silas, his late wife's gentle laughter, a child's squeal at her first pony ride nudged at Elias, but he shoved them down, business first. Feeling could wait. "Where is she?" he asked. Silas pointed a shaky finger toward a hallway lined with dusty mirrors. "Back room. Been locked 3 days now. She don't eat much. Won't cause trouble." A storm churned behind Elias's ribs, though his face remained carved from marble. He counted out the bills, 50s and 20s, placing each one deliberately, so Silas had to reach, hand quivering like a leaf. With every bill, Elias felt the wrongness coil tighter around his throat. He'd robbed stagecoaches and stood off marshals, but nothing had ever felt this foul. When the last dollar slid across, Silas snatched the money, stuffing it into a tattered ledger book. "Pleasure doing," he began, but Elias was already walking away, boots heavy on the warped floorboards. He pushed through the hallway's shadows, unaware that each step carried him closer to a door and a revelation that would crack his hardened soul wide open. Elias paused before the backroom door, palm hovering over the knob. The hallway smelled of stale beer and kerosene, but beneath those odors he caught a faint whiff of Lavender Elizabeth's favorite soap. A memory flared, a small blonde girl chasing butterflies behind Silas's mercantile, her laughter ringing like Sunday bells. Elias clenched his jaw. That was 15 years, and 1,000 wrong turns ago. The hired buyer in Santa Fe wanted a nameless teenager, not a father's recollection. Still, his heartbeat drummed loud enough he feared the whole saloon would hear it. The latch clicked. The door groaned open. At first, the room seemed empty, just a single oil lamp flickering on a crate and a straw mattress shoved against weather-stained planks. Then he saw her, a slender girl in a once yellow dress, knees drawn to her chest, a rusted chain padlocked to an iron ring in the floor. Her skin, though grimy, was smooth as porcelain. Her hair, dulled by dust, hinted at the honey color Elias remembered from his wife's braid. She lifted her head, and her eyes verdant green, sharp as flint speared him through. "Are you here to buy me too?" Her voice was steady, though her hands trembled in her lap. Elias's body went weightless, as if the earth had fallen away. A thin scar arced above her left brow, a souvenir from a tumble off a corral fence he'd once mended. He had kissed that very cut, promising she'd be safe, promising he'd never leave. Savannah. Words dried in his throat. Panic, guilt, and a surge of feral protectiveness warred inside him. He pulled the door shut behind him, half fearing Silas might appear, half grateful for the barrier. His Colt felt suddenly heavier at his hypno, longer a tool of trade, but an indictment. Savannah's gaze sharpened. "You're not like the others." She studied his bone-white skin, the silver lashes. "Your eyes same color, same cold." She hesitated, then whispered, "Do you know my name?" Elias swallowed hard. "Savannah," he managed, the single word tasting of ashes and forgiveness, unmet. She flinched, confusion knitting her brow. "How Grandpa told me never to say my real name. Said men wouldn't pay as much if they knew." Elias crouched, careful to keep distance. Up close, he saw the grime under her nails, the welt where the chain had rubbed her ankle raw. His vision blurred with rage, at Silasand, at himself. "I'm not here to harm you," he said, voice low. "I came to take you away from this place." She hugged her knees tighter. "For $500? The question cut deeper than any bullet. Elias pressed a fist to his chest, willing himself not to break. "No money on this earth could buy you, child." A beat of silence passed. Savannah's chin lifted with the same stubborn tilt Elizabeth once had. "Then who are you?" Elias opened his mouth, then froze as muffled voices drifted down the hallway. Rough laughter, heavy boots. Other buyers? Or worse, the Carver brothers Silas had mentioned? Whatever the answer, he had precious seconds to decide. Reveal the truth now, or secure her freedom first. He drew his knife, sliced through the padlock's leather collar with a practiced flick, and snapped the chain. Savannah gasped but didn't recoil. Instead, she studied him, seeing, perhaps, a flicker of memory in his angular features. The voices grew nearer. "Stay behind me," Elias whispered, ushering her toward the shadows near a warped wardrobe, his Colt-cleared leather, barrel glinting in lamplight. Savannah's lips parted. "Do I know you?" Elias felt the past grinding against the present, like tectonic plates ready to erupt. "Soon," he promised, eyes locked on the door. "But first, I need to keep you safe." Outside, a floorboard creaked. Elias leveled his gun, every nerve alive. In that charged heartbeat, he understood. The sins of abandonment were circling back, and he had one chance to rewrite the ending with blood, if necessary, but also with the fierce, unwavering love he should have offered 15 years ago. Elias eased the girl into the narrow space behind the warped wardrobe, pressing a forefinger to his lips. "No sound," he whispered. "I'll be back." She nodded, eyes wide but steady. Satisfied she was hidden, he slipped from the room and pulled the door almost shut. Just outside the threshold, voices rose in sloppy argument, Silas haggling with someone who wasn't willing to take sold for an answer. Elias stepped into the hazy saloon, and the conversation died as abruptly as a campfire doused with river water. Silas Granger, clutching his fresh roll of bills, blinked at Elias's sudden reappearance. Opposite him stood 3 ranch hands. He didn't recognize bristly men smelling of dust, sweat, and rotten intentions. Their leader, a broad-shouldered brute with tobacco-stained teeth, turned a curious eye toward Elias's pale face. "Evenin', stranger," the brute drawled. "Silas here promised us first crack at merchandise." His grin was wolfish. "Reckon you jumped the line." Elias ignored him, snatching Silas by the lapels and dragging the older man toward the street doors. Cards and glasses scattered as the patrons scrambled out of the way. Nobody interfered, the sort of neutrality men adopt when violence feels inevitable. Outside, the sun still baked the road, but Elias felt cold as mountain ice. "How many girls?" he hissed, shoving Silas against a hitching post. "How many lives did you trade for liquor?" Silas's eyes skittered like marbles on a washboard. "Times are hard, you don't understand, store-burned debts," he stammered. Whiskey breath washed over Elias like sour milk. "Savannah's worth more untouched. I kept her safe until today." "Safe?" Elias's voice dropped to a deadly hush. "You chained a child to a floor." He pressed his revolver under Silas's sagging chin. "You sold your own blood." Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Silas's Adam's apple bobbed once, twice. "Tomb's sorry, Elias, please. The bottle got hold of me." A burst of commotion behind them. The 3 ranch hands burst through the saloon doors, hands hovering near holsters. "Deal's deal, old man," their leader barked, glaring at Elias. "Either he gives the girl to us, or we take her off both your corpses. Doesn't matter which." Elias angled his body, shielding Silas while tracking the trio with a gunslinger's calm. "You boys picked the wrong day," he said, voice quiet but carrying. The sun gleamed off the nickel plating of his Colt steady, unwavering. Silas wheezed, terror replacing drunken bravado. "Elias, don't—" "Shut up," Elias snapped. His pale eyes never left the approaching thugs. "You'll get what's coming. But first, I've got to clean up the mess you invited to my daughter's doorstep." The word daughter rang in the charged air like church bells at noon, and for the first time, Silas seemed to grasp the full horror of what he'd done. Mud and heat baked into cracked clay beneath Elias Whitaker's boots as he faced the 3 strangers fanning out in front of Miller's saloon. Up close, he recognized them, the Carver brothers' dusters, stiff with trail dust, gun belts hanging low for a quick draw. Years ago, Elias had crossed paths with their kind, men who'd steal calves in spring, whiskey in winter, and human lives whenever the price looked right. "Name your stake," Elias said, voice level. He kept Silas Granger half hidden behind him, though every decent instinct urged him to throw the old drunk to the wolves. Big Hank Carver broad as a barn door, beard the color of rusty nail spat, a wad of chew into the dirt. "Stake's simple, Albino. Silas promised us a girl. 15, untouched, makes good coin down in Tucson. You show up with fancy cash, cut us out." He tipped his hat back, eyes mean as a copperhead. "We aim to collect." Elias glanced right, and left Main Street sat empty, but for a stray dog and the lazy swing of a weather-warped sign. The townsfolk had slipped indoors, shutters cracked just wide enough to watch. No sheriff in sight. Rumor said he'd take a Carver payoff quicker than a gambler grabs aces. If justice was coming, it rode on Elias's holster. "You boys walk away," he said, thumb stroking the hammer of his Colt .45, "and I forget your faces." Middle brother Clay Carver snickered. "Hard to forget a snow-white gunman. Figure you're the one who'll be faceless in a minute." His hand twitched toward his pistol. Elias never shifted his fetenly. Let silence stretch. Mind ticking off distance. Angle, sun glare. A lifetime with a gun had taught him most men hesitated at the edge of murder. The Carvers didn't look like thinkers. They'd either step forward or step back. Silas whimpered behind him. "Ella, please. They'll kill us both." Elias spoke without glancing rearward. "Right now, Silas, I'm fine with half that bargain." The words were still hanging when Clay drew first. Sunday flashed on steel, but Elias moved quicker, Colt roaring once. Clay spun, a crimson bloom spreading across his tan vest, dropped to the dust with a grunt. Big Hank barked a curse and lunged. Elias pivoted, planting his heel, firing again. Hank's revolver fired wild into the porch beam before his knees buckled. The last brother, Skinny Jed, froze gun half clear, eyes saucer wide. Elias leveled his Colt. "Don't," he warned, voice flat as the high desert. Jed let his weapon clatter to the ground, hands raised. The exchange had lasted no longer than a thunderclap. Acrid gun smoke drifted on the hot breeze, mingling with the sour smell of fear. Silas knelt beside Hank's collapsed form, face ash gray. "Mother of mercy," he muttered. Elias kicked Jed's pistol out of reach, then towed the roll of cash from Silas's pocket, the money meant to buy Savannah's enslavement. He shoved it at Jed. "Take your brother, take that dirty money, and ride south till the dust on your boots turns red. If I see you again, I finish the tally." Jed hauled Hank to his feet, half dragged, half carried him to their horses. Clay lay groaning but breathing. Jed slung him over a saddle horn. Within minutes the Carvers thundered out of town, leaving a trail of pink-tinged dust. Elias turned to Silas, who sat quaking on the step. "I gave you every chance," he said, voice raw. "The next bullet's yours if you try to barter a life again." Silas only nodded, eyes empty of fight. Elias holstered his Colt and strode back toward the rear hallway, each step heavy with purpose. Savannah was waiting still hidden, still unsure. The gunman with snow-white skin had just painted Main Street with the wages of sin, but the hardest reckoning lay ahead, telling a 15-year-old girl that the stranger who saved her was the father who'd once ridden away. Elias slipped back through the hallway, heart pounding like war drums. Behind the warped wardrobe, Savannah wait barefoot, wrists still ringed with red from the chain. He glimpsed her wide eyes just long enough to whisper, "Stay down and cover your ears." Then the saloon erupted. The Carver brothers had not slunk off to nurse their pride. They had circled the building and shouldered their way through the rear door, guns already drawn. The corridor was barely 5 feet wide weather-warped walls, cracked lanterns throwing jittery shadows, perfect for a single marksman, deadly for anyone caught in a crossfire. Big Hank Carver led the charge, ducking low, shotgun thrust forward. Elias stepped from a doorway, not 10 feet away, Colt raised. The lantern's yellow light flashed across his bone-white Phaeacian apparition wrenched from nightmare and Hank flinched. That fraction of hesitation cost him. Elias's revolver barked once. The slug lifted Hank off his feet, the shotgun firing harmlessly into the ceiling as he toppled. Clay Carver, quickest of the three, hurled himself over Hank's falling bulk. A knife glittered in his fist too close for comfort. Elias pivoted, felt the blade slice through his coat sleeve and graze pale flesh. Pain lanced up his arm, but he didn't retreat. Instead, he slammed Clay's wrist against the wall. Bone crunched, the knife fell. Elias drilled a second round center. Mass. Clay sagged, gasping, knees buckling onto his brother's corpse. Jed, the youngest, jittery and reckless, screamed a curse and fired blindly down the passage. Plaster exploded near Elias's head. Splinters peppered his cheek. Smoke filled the cramped space, stinging his light-sensitive eyes. He dropped to one knee, steadied a two-handed grip despite the knife wound, and squeezed the trigger. Jed's revolver clattered as he took the bullet in his shoulder. But Elias didn't fire again. Instead, he lunged forward, seizing Jed's collar and slamming him against the wall hard enough to jolt the breath from his lungs. Jed's weapon scraped across floorboards toward Savannah's hiding place. Elias kicked it away. "Get it over with," Jed rasped, spitting blood. Elias pressed the Colt's warm barrel beneath Jed's jawline. For a heartbeat, the hallway held nothing but the ragged rasp of 3 dying men and the thunder of Elias's pulse. Then Savannah's voice, small but unshaken, drifted from the wardrobe gap. "Daddy?" The single word cut deeper than any blade. Elias's trigger finger slackened. He stared at Jed, seeing not an enemy but a hollowed-out youth who'd followed wicked brothers down a dark trail. "Go," Elias ordered, voice flint hard. "Saddle a horse, ride south, and never breathe her name." He yanked Jed upright, marched him to the kitchen door, and shoved him into the dusk. Jed staggered away, clutching his ruined shoulder, glancing back once at the albino gunman who had spared him for reasons he'd never understand. Elias returned to the corridor. Gunpowder stung his lungs. Blood dripped from his arm. He holstered the Colt and knelt beside Savannah's hiding place. She stepped out, eyes shimmering in the smoky light, no longer afraid. He opened his arms, and, after a trembling moment, she ran into them, no longer merchandise, but a daughter restored in the echo of gunfire. Elias held Savannah only a heartbeat long enough to feel her ribs beneath his arms, thin as rails, long enough for her lavender scent to break his hardened composure. Then he forced himself to pull back. Smoke still curled through the hallway. Splinters and blood dotted the floor. This night's work wasn't over. "Sweetheart, listen." His voice wavered on the endearment, a word he hadn't used since Savannah was 3. "Your grandfather hinted there are other children. Do you know where?" Savannah's jaw tightened. "I've heard crying," she whispered. "From below the saloon, near the old coal chute. Grandpa said rats lived down there, but—" She swallowed hard. Those rats spoke English. The rage that had fueled Elias's gun hand settled into a colder, more dangerous focus. He took her hand, marveling that she didn't flinch, and led her into the lantern-lit saloon. Silas Granger huddled behind the bar, clutching the money roll like a life-preserver. He looked up at the pale gunman and the teenage girl with matching green eyes, and he knew the lie was finished. "Basement key," Elias said, stretching out his wounded arm. Silas shook so badly the ring of keys clinked like winter icicles. Elias snatched them, then fixed Silas with a stare that could frost glass. "Every child you caged is coming home. If you want breath in your lungs tomorrow, pray they're alive." Silas muttered something about debt and ruin, but Elias was already marching toward a trap door behind the gambling tables. He hoisted it, a musty reek rolling out the smell of damp wood, unwashed bodies, hopeless tears. Savannah pressed her sleeve to her nose, yet stepped down first, lantern in one hand, her father's Colt in the other. Elias followed, closing the trap door behind them. The cellar ceiling was so low, Elias had to hunch. Crates and broken barrels formed a crooked aisle to an improvised cage. Rough, hewn stalls, once meant for livestock, now rigged with iron latches and padlocks. 3 girls no older than 12 stared, eyes reflecting lantern light like startled fawns. One wore nothing but a flour sack. Another clutched a ragged doll. At the sight of Savannah's gentle smile and Elias's stark white face, they retreated to the far wall. Elias kept his voice soft, though fury quaked beneath it. "I'm not here to harm you, darlings. We're taking you out of this place." He passed the keys to Savannah. "Your hands are steadier than mine." She fumbled only a moment before the first lock clicked open. The youngest girl burst into sobs of relief. Savannah knelt, wrapping her in the yellow dress she herself had worn. "It's okay," she murmured. "He's my daddy. He came back." Those 4 words arrowed straight through Elias's chest, yet he pushed on, unlocking each stall, lifting shivering bodies out. Lantern light revealed bruises and ankles rubbed raw by rope. Each wound stamped Silas's guilt deeper into Elias's heart. Minutes later, 5 figures climbed the crooked cellar stairs. Outside, dawn's first light brushed the rim of the eastern hills. Elias boosted each child onto Midnight, his white stallion, then swung Savannah up behind him. The other girls rode the Carvers' abandoned mounts. Main Street lay silent, doors still barred, curtains still drawn, but the sky blushed with a promise of justice. Elias turned once toward the saloon. Silas hovered miserably in the doorway, blood money limp in his fist. "You best pray a judge finds you before I do," Elias called. "If one of these children so much as coughs from what you did, hell will seem merciful." Then he wheeled Midnight westward. 5 small arms clutched his coat. Savannah's cheek pressed between his shoulder blades. As hoofbeats carried them toward the sheriff's office and whatever reckoning lay beyond, Elias finally exhaled. The road to redemption would be long, but sunrise had found him riding in the right direction, his daughter's heartbeat steady against his own. Elias reined Midnight to a halt outside the 1-story clapboard building that served Dry Creek as both sheriff's office and jail. A battered tin star hung above the door. Beneath it, the morning sun cast shadows long enough to trip a man's conscience if he still had one. Savannah slid to the ground first, helping the 3 rescued girls dismount. They huddled close, wide eyes scanning every angle of a town that had never offered them kindness. Inside, typewriter keys clacked, then stopped. Sheriff Wade Colton stepped into the doorway, thumbs hooked in a too-shiny gun belt. He wore the easy grin of a man who'd learned to grease both sides of a coin. 2 deputies flanked him, rifles resting casual across forearms. "Well, if it isn't Elias Whitaker," Colton drawled, gaze flicking from the albino gunman to the trembling children. "Heard there was a commotion at Miller's dead men, missing property." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Looks like the problem just rode up on my porch." Elias kept one hand on Midnight's reins, the other eased back to his Colt. "These girls were chained in Silas Granger's cellar. Carver brothers tried to cart my daughter off. They're the problem." Colton's eyebrows rose in mock surprise. "Silas Granger? Good citizen, pays his taxes. And the Carvers?" He clicked his tongue. "Rugged fellas, but they fill my jail with cash every time they pass through." His deputies chuckled. The sound made Savannah stiffen. Elias felt the children inch closer behind him. He shifted, blocking Colton's line of sight. "I'm taking them to the circuit judge in Mesa Bluff. You're welcome to ride along if you've got nothing to hide." Colton's grin flattened. "Judge McAfee's 2 days east. That trail gets mighty lonely. Be a shame if Outlaws cut you down before you got there." The deputies raised their rifles a hair, just enough to send dust skittering. Savannah's voice, thin but steady, floated past Elias's elbow. "Sheriff, my grandpa sold us. You gonna arrest him?" Colton's gaze hardened. "Little lady, sometimes a debt's a debt." Elias's temper snapped like a gun hammer. "Debt?" He stepped forward, pale face blazing under the sun. "The only debt here is your stow, the oath on that tin star." A tense beat. A crow cawed from the church steeple. Colton exhaled through his nose, then nodded to a deputy. "Take the girls inside for questioning. Let's settle this civilized." Elias drew before the deputy moved an inch. His Colt's barrel hovered at Colton's chest. "Civilized ends when you threaten a child. Tell your men to lower those guns." Colton's fingers twitched near his holster, but the albino's icy stare held him. At last, the sheriff lifted both palms. "Easy, Whitaker. No need for blood." Elias jerked his chin toward the street. "Then step aside, because if one badge in this town lifts a finger against these girls, the next coffin built will be yours." Silence swallowed the street. Finally, Colton backed into the office doorway, deputies retreating with him. Elias holstered the Colt, swung Savannah back onto Midnight, and whistled the other horses forward. As they trotted past, Savannah whispered, "You think he'll come after us?" Elias never looked back. Maybe. But today he learned evil carries interest, and I aim to collect. The narrow trail to Mesa Bluff wound along Bear Claw Ridge. Sheer drops to one side, a thicket of lodgepole pine on the other. Elias kept Midnight at a walk, listening for anything that did not belong, an echo of iron shoes, the rattle of loose tack, the cough of a nervous gelding. By late afternoon, the rescued girls dozed in the saddle, lulled by the rhythmic clop. Only Savannah rode alert behind her father, arms cinched round his waist, cheek pressed between his shoulder blades. They had just crested a saddle in the ridge when Savannah stiffened. "Riders," she whispered. Elias reined in and glanced downslope. 3 specks moved among the pines: Sheriff Colton and his deputies, cutting the switchbacks, gambling on speed over stealth. Elias's lips thinned. He had hoped Colton's greed would keep him in Dry Creek. Instead, the sheriff had decided to erase all witnesses before a judge could hear their testimony. Elias studied the terrain. A quarter-mile ahead, the trail pinched between a granite outcrop and a dry wash-good natural cover. "Hold tight, sweetheart," he said. He guided the horses into a finger of brush below the rock wall, swung Savannah to the ground, then lifted the youngest girls down and tucked them behind a fallen log. "Stay low. Eyes shut when the shooting starts." They nodded, too exhausted to protest. The wind shifted, carrying the jingle of spurs and the sheriff's gravel laugh. Elias slipped between boulders, his pale complexion almost glowing in the dusk, and braced his rifle across a knee. He had 5 rounds in the Winchester, 6 in the Colt, and a lifetime of regret to steady his aim. Savannah crawled beside him. "I can help," she whispered. "Your job is to keep them safe," he murmured. Yet he felt her small hand on his injured arm, a reminder that every bullet he fired carried her future. Hoofbeats drummed closer. Colton's voice echoed off the rock. "Whitaker, hand over the brats and we'll call it square. Otherwise we drag you back in chains or a pine box." Elias sighted down the barrel. The deputies emerged first, rifles loose across their saddles. He squeezed. The Winchester cracked. The lead deputy tumbled from his horse, weapon spinning away. Before the second could wheel around, Elias's Colt barked twice. The man jerked, then slumped over the horn, reins tangling in brush. Colton kicked his mount up the wash, revolver blazing. Granite chips stung Elias's cheek. He ducked, rolled, felt the ache in his knife-slashed arm flare. Colton dismounted behind a stump, firing wild. One slug snapped a branch inches above Savannah's head. She yanked the younger girls deeper into cover. Elias crawled to a new angle. Colton's brim edged above the stump, a fraction of silhouette. Elias inhaled, let grief, fury, and paternal love fuse into crystalline focus, then fired. The sheriff's hat leapt skyward. Colton pitched backward, revolver falling among the needles. Silence flooded the wash, broken only by the wind sighing through pine boughs. Elias waited, rifle trained, until sure no breath stirred behind the stump. Then he stood, knees shaking with weeks of fatigue. Savannah scrambled from hiding, hugging him so hard his ribs creaked. He felt her tears soak his shirt, and for once he let his own fall hot, cleansing drops that quenched 15 years of self-loathing. The youngest girl tugged his sleeve, pointing wide-eyed at the scene. "Are we really safe now, mister?" "Safe," Elias assured her, voice ragged but certain. "The law meets us in Mesa Bluff tomorrow, and this time it'll be honest." He gathered the children, mounted them anew, and led the horses into the lengthening light. Behind them, the ridge kept its secrets: blood, brass, and a battered tin star that would never gleam again. Ahead lay a courthouse, a circuit judge, and the fragile beginnings of redemption. But for Elias Whitaker, the battle for his daughter's trust, The battle that mattered most was already won. 6 months after that deadly ride to Mesa Bluff, the Whitaker Ranch hums with a quieter kind of music. Fence wire pinging beneath a summer breeze, young voices reciting their lessons by lantern light, the soft whicker of horses at dusk. Savannah no longer a hollow-eyed captive splits her days between bookwork and mending tack, laughing freely with the 3 younger girls whom Elias adopted after the trial. Judge McAfee's gavel sent Silas to prison and put an end to Dry Creek's corrupt law. Yet the verdict that mattered most arrived every dawn when Savannah descended the loft ladder and greeted her father with the same 2 words he once feared he'd never earn, "Morning, Daddy." Elias Whitaker still carries the pale scars of his albinism and the darker scars of old regrets, but each sunrise brings a small absolution. Together, father and daughter repaired the barn, sold the Carver stallions to buy school books, and planted a garden where iron chains once rusted. Some nights, Elias wakes breathless from dreams of the cellar and the Carver's guns. Then he finds Savannah asleep by the window, moonlight silvering her hair, and he remembers why he fought, why he'll keep fighting for the rest of his days. No matter how long the road, it is never too late to ride back and do right. Elias learned that redemption isn't earned with bullets, it's earned by showing up each day, protecting the vulnerable, and letting love, not shame, dictate your next step. If you're carrying a burden of past mistakes, remember, the first turn toward home begins with courage, and the people who need you may be waiting just around the bend. Did this story stir a memory or teach you something about second chances? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Your wisdom can guide others traveling their own hard trails. And if frontier tales of courage, redemption, and family resonate with you, tap subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss the next ride. Until then, keep your saddle cinched and your heart open. There's always another sunrise on the horizon.